Hi, today is September 3rd at 8 p.m. It's the third class of Varieties of Teshuva. This is Sefa Kirschblum, and we are going to start tonight with a new character. Hopefully you got this in your emails, but just in case, it'll always be on the screen. Last 2 weeks we spent trying to understand on whatever level we could Cain in the story of Cain and Hevel, and seeing the idea of tshuva as real introspection and taking that introspection to push yourself to be your best self. And tonight we're going to start exploring a few other characters that I think always come to mind when it comes to Rosh Hashanah because of the Torah reading. On the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we learn Perek Chaf Aleph, which is not on tonight's source sheet. That'll be next Sunday. But it is the story of Yishmael and Hagar getting kicked out of Sarah's house after the birth of Yitzchak. Really, obviously, trying to focus on the story of Yitzchak, because on day 2 of Rosh Hashanah, we learn the story of the Akedah, which is the next parak, the story of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak. And therefore, most people look at the stories of Rosh Hashanah and say, oh, this is about Yitzchak, right? The focal point of these 2 days is clearly Yitzchak, because first we're learning about his birth, and then the next major story of his life is the story of the Akedah. But what I'd love to do tonight and next Sunday is maybe understand the other characters a little bit more, so that we can maybe see these Torah readings in a new perspective and maybe have a different takeaway of why we would read this on Rosh Hashanah. So in general, just like the concept, if you want to know what a word in Tanakh, what it means, you should always go to the first time it is mentioned in Torah, because that will often give you the best interpretation of what the word means. I personally believe the same is true of characters. If you want to understand a personality in Tanakh, if you want to understand a character in Tanakh, your best case is to start where they start and literally follow the train that God provides for you of these personalities. So to understand Yitzchak and Yishmael means we first have to understand their parents and meet them for the first time. So together we are now going back to Perek Yud Aleph in Sefer Bereshit, right? This is right before Lech Lecha, right? A lot of people look at the story of Lech Lecha as really the first time we're getting to meet Abraham and Sarah, but we meet them one parak earlier, really just a few verses earlier, but at the end of Perek Yud Aleph. And I'll apologize in the start, I will often call her Sarah even before her name is changed, just because it's just what comes to my mind. So I apologize if I don't call her Sarai and I call her Sarah, because she ultimately turns into Sarah. But when we first meet her here, she's going to be Sarai. So here we have Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Chaf Vav. Vayechi Terach 70 shana vayoled et Avraham et Nahor ve'et Haran. And the life of Terach, he lived for 70 years, and then he fathered Avraham, Nahor, and Haran. Now, I only brought you in Pasuk Chavav in Perek Yud Aleph, but if you were to look back at majority of the Perek, and literally the majority of the story from Migdal Bavel, right, the story right after the Mabul until now, it's really genealogy. We literally are just getting a list of families, right? Because from Noah to Abraham was 10 generations, and we literally get to hear those 10 generations of humanity until this point. So now we're learning about Terach, who has these 3 sons, Avram, Nahor, and Haran. Pasuk Chav Zayin, ve'ela toldo Terach, Terach holid et Avram, et Nahor, ve'et Haran, v'Haran holid et Lot. Right, so these are the descendants, the stories of Terach. He had these 3 sons, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran, and now we get to meet Abraham's nephew, Haran's son Lot, right, who is obviously, going to become, I don't want to say a main character, but of the main characters. Pasuk Chavchet, Vayamat Haran al Penei Terach Aviv be'eretz moladito b'or kastim. And Haran dies while his father is still alive in the lands he grew up in or Kastim, right? And this pasuk is written so awkwardly, but so many people highlight here, it's clearly acknowledging he died too young, right? Instead of writing that he died young, he died when his father was still alive, meaning this is not, as Torah would say, not the way of the world. Something is interesting and strange, right? Which is where that midrash comes in. And so I just want to, I apologize, but I want to digress to that midrash for 1 minute because I think it's such a monumental midrash, a midrash that so many people have heard of, but don't really know where it comes from. So there comes a midrash. I believe it's famous, so I'll use. I think it's renowned, a renowned midrash. That how did Avraham come to God? Right, he had been working for his father, and his father sold idols, and one day his father put him in charge of his store of the idols. And Avraham, since he believed in monotheism, he literally destroyed all of the idols and put an axe in one of the statue's hands. His father comes into the store, he sees everything destroyed except for this one statue. And he looks at Avram and he's like, what happened here? What is going on? And Avram's like, oh, so awkward, right? They had this huge fight, but he won, right? That huge statue in the corner, that with the axe in his hands, he won. He destroyed everybody else because he had to be the best, right? Obviously making fun, what statue is destroying all the other ones, but what was his father going to say to him? Ultimately, according to the Midrash, Nimrod, who was the king of the time, believed not only in Avodah Zarah, but hated Avraham for his monotheistic beliefs. And here's the real famous part of the story, calls in Avraham and says, if you are going to believe in this monotheism, I'm going to throw you in the Kivshan Ha'esh. I will throw you into this fire, and maybe your God can save you. Right? And according to the Midrash, Avram says, I am not willing to give up my faith. And he jumps into the Kivshan Ha'esh, he jumps into the fire, and he survives. And according to the Midrash, Haran watches this and says, I also believe, right? Even though he didn't actually, it was more this wow factor of the entire scene and how famous he assumed Avraham would become from it. He jumps in, but he does not survive because it was not out of true faith. And that's why the highlight here is or custom. This is where the midrash comes in, right? Because the midrash is answering a lot of the questions here. Why doesn't it tell us how Haran died? Why is it that Avraham is going to take Lot under his wing, for the rest of his life? Why is it telling us they're from Or Kasdim when we hear Haran as every other name? So meaning the midrash actually is answering a lot of questions that most other mafarshim don't, right? But I tell you this story because as someone who personally loves the pshat and is very emotionally attached to the pshat, I can tell you that when I first started learning Tanakh, I was in college, but it was the first time I actually wanted to open a Tanakh and actually study it. And I was searching for the story because I had heard the story of Avram walking through this fire since I was a kid. And when it was not in the text, I could tell you that personally, my faith was shaken. I was troubled is a nice word for saying that I couldn't understand how everyone was teaching me this when it wasn't in the story at all, where I couldn't find it to save my life. And so I want to highlight that it took me a long time to not only find the midrash, understand the midrash, but more significantly appreciate that midrash is not just these weird stories that come out of nowhere. They are answering questions in the text. They are pulling different pieces together and not only teaching us a lesson, but also very much appreciating the words that we are going to be focusing on. So sorry for that digression. We jump back into Abraham's story. Pasuk Chavtet, Vayikach Avraham v'Nachor lahem nashim. Right, so Avram and Nahor get married. Shem Eshet Avraham Sarai, v'Shem Eshet Nahor Milka. Bat Haran Avi Milka va'Avi Yiska. Right, and the second part of this verse is very confusing and a lot of subjects, but unclear who these subjects are attached to, which is why many Mefarshim here say that Sarai was Avraham's niece also, right? They were very much related. She was also a descendant of Terach, but Lefi Hapshat, he marries this woman Sarai, and everyone else throughout the story of Perek Yud Aleph it doesn't tell us, number one, about their wives. We don't really care about their wives, but we really just care about their kids, right? That's the highlight. This generation to this generation, right? Even Ve'ila Toldo, Terach Validat Avram. We never hear about Terach's wife. We don't hear about wives. So this pasuk is already strange, highlighting something really beautiful about Avraham and his relationship with Sarah, right? It's highlighting that he wanted a wife for a wife's sake, not just to be the mother of his children, but for their own partnership, for what she was going to bring to the table of his life and to what he believed would be the future. But Pasuk Lamed, the first piece of information the Torah wants us to know about her, Pasuk Lamed, Vatihi Sarai Akara, Ein La Valad. Sarai was barren. She did not have children, right? Because again, this was the highlight of every person, was just their children, just what the next generation was. And not only is it letting us know that Avram doesn't have the next generation, right? It's letting us know that it's Sarai who is the Akara, right? And what is this going to do to their dynamic, to the dynamic of Avraham and Sarah, and ultimately with Hakadosh Baruch Hu, right? And that's how we end meeting them in Perek Yud Aleph. And now we jump into Perek Yud Bet, just a few verses later, the famous mitzvah of Lach Lecha. So let's see what happens. Perek Yud Bet, Pasuk Aleph, Vayomer Hashem el Avraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetcha u'mibeit avicha el haaretz asher areka. Right? Hashem comes to Avraham and he says, I want you to go to the land, from your land, from where you grew up, from your father's house, from everything you know, to a land I'm going to show you. Pasuk Bet, ve'escha legoy gadol, and I will make you into a great nation. Va'avarechacha va'agadla shemecha, I will bless you and I will make your name great. V'hayeh bracha, and you will be blessed. Va'avarcha mevarecha, those who bless you will be blessed. U'mekalalecha, or those who curse you will be cursed. V'nivruchu v'cha kol mishvachot adama, and everyone will use you as like the poster child of blessing, right? You will be the poster child of what blessing looks like. Now, I want to spend a few minutes understanding Lech Lecha. So a few pieces of backgrounds. Number one, it will tell us in a few verses, Avram is already 75 years old at this point, right? Usually we assume that he's this young guy, right? This is the first time we're seeing God talk to him. So it must be early on in, their relationship. We have no idea what their relationship was before. And when I say relationship here, I'm referring to God and Avraham. But in addition, he's 75 and Sarah is 65, right? It will highlight many times that she's 10 years younger than him. And what's so interesting is I totally appreciate that biology was different then, and I totally understand that years were different. They lived a lot longer. 65 and 75 is not what it is today. I acknowledge that, but they're not young. They are not young. And in Torah, people got married young. So the assumption here is they've been married for a significant amount of time, even before this, right? So imagine that God is coming to him after years of being married. And I imagine the one thing that they are davening for, begging for every day is to be parents. And Hashem comes and tells him to pick up and move, to abandon everything he knows. But I want you to hear Pasuk Bet through Avraham's ears. Ve'escha legoy gadol, I will make you into a great nation. If you pick up and you make Aliyah, you get up and you move to Israel, I will make you a great nation. And not only will I bless you, right? That sounds very lovely, but you'll be so blessed. You'll be the poster child. When people want to be blessed, if they want to use the concept of what a blessed life looks like, they're going to point to you. Now, there's no way that in Avraham's mind, he's not thinking, no one would point to me as blessing if I have no kids, right? Kids are the end all be all, right? That's what everyone's hoping for. It's not just me. It's not his dream. It's in everyone's dream. So he's like, well, all I can hear is if I move to Israel, I'm going to be a dad, right? Sarah and I are going to be parents, right? So in no way am I taking away from Lech Lecha. In no way am I taking away from Aliyah. It is not easy, no matter when and how. But wow, right? Wow, what is he hearing in this? Okay, God, game on, right? I thought if I believed in you, that's what you wanted. I thought, if I did what I believed monotheism was, then you would bless me. But now you're being articulate, right? You're very clear here. If I move to Israel, then I will be blessed, aka I will have a child, right? So of course, Pasuk Daled, Vayelech Avram Ka'asher Diber Elav Hashem, right? Yalla, let's go, right? Picks up and heads out because this is what he's been waiting for, right? This was the speech from God he's been waiting for. So they head into Israel. Page 2, right? The end of Perek Yud Bet, not much happens. It's more, he moves in, he builds a whatchamacallit, he builds a Mizbeach to thank Hashem and moves to Beersheba for a bit, right? But then Perek Yud Gimel, I only brought you 2 psukim towards the middle, but that is when the first Ra'av that we hear about takes place, right? There is a famine. He takes Sarah, and it doesn't say in the text, but we see at the end of the story, Lot clearly was with them. They head to Mitzrayim because they cannot survive without moving. The Ra'av is so bad, the famine is so bad. They move to Mitzrayim. Paro ultimately takes Sarah, right? That's a whole separate story, not for tonight, that he takes her into the palace. God protects her. He never touches her, and they leave. But after they leave, when they head back to Israel, this is God's speech in Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Ted Vav, Ki et kol haaretz asher ata ro'eh, lecha etnena ulizaracha ad olam. Right? Hashem is so thankful to Avram for everything, for his commitment. And Hashem says, look around, Ki et kol haaretz asher ata ro'eh, every part of this country, every part of Israel that you can see, lecha etnena, it's yours, it's a gift. Right? But again, those key words to Avraham, ulizaracha ad olam, and for your descendants forever. Right? Pasuk Tet Zayin, v'samti et zaracha ka'afar haaretz. Right? And this is the first time God is articulate. Right? Hashem says, I'm going to make your children, your descendants, like the dust of the earth. Asher im yuchal ish libnot et afar haaretz. Can someone possibly count all the dust in the world? Gam zaracha yimane. That's how many children you're going to have. No one can count them. They're just going to be literally this infinite, incredible number that no one would even attempt to count, right? So in Perek Yud Gimel, all of a sudden Avram's like, oh, right, okay, good, right? We came, this is why we came. It's been taking a long time, right? Month after month, Sarah is not pregnant, but okay, you were as clear can be. I'm going to have descendants, and I'm going to have so many descendants that you won't even be able to count them. Great, right? Perek Yud Daled continues. We have the story of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. Avram fights for God, but no family dynamic. We don't get to hear about the family dynamic, so we think all is okay. And then we get into Perek Tet Vav, which is so powerful in terms of what Avram says to God, what God says to Avraham. So I want us to see it together. So Sefer Bereshit, Perek Tet Vav. Hashem says to him, Al tira Avraham. Don't be scared, Avraham. Anochi magen lach scharcha harbe ma'od. Right? Avraham is clearly at a breaking point, right? Hashem is seeing this and he's like, Avraham, I promise everything's going to be great, right? I promise for all of your commitment, for all of your devotion to me, you will get so much schar, you will get so much reward, right? And finally, Pasuk Bet, the conversation that I think so many of us wish we could talk back to God in this way and we could have this dialogue, right? Vayomer Avraham. Avram turns to Hashem and he says, Hashem, what titen what are you going to give me? Va'anochi holech ariri uben meshek beiti hu damesek Eliezer. He says, I'm rich, but what's with all this money? What do I care about all this money? My servant, Eliezer, right? Not a descendant, not someone from my DNA and my blood. A servant is going to inherit me. Right? Is this a joke? Right? What do I care? What do I care about all this money anymore? Right? There's no one to get it from me. What have I invested in for Eliezer, my servant, to inherit it? Like, what do I care? Pasuk Gimel, Vayomer Avram, and finally, I imagine Avram took a break, realizing he was talking a little disrespectfully, regrouped, right? And then says, okay, Hainli lo natata zara. Hashem, you haven't given me a kid, right? Yes, you've blessed me. Yes, everything so far has been technically good now, but you didn't give me a kid. Hinei ben beiti orishoti, right? I've got servants going to inherit me. I don't even have a descendant to take everything I've built. Pasuk Dalid. So finally, Hashem says to him, Hinei dvar Hashem elav lemor. The words of Hashem came to him and said, Lo yirash chazeh. Avram, don't be silly. Eliezer isn't going to be the one that inherits from you. Ki im asher yetzei mime'echa. Right? There will be someone who literally comes from you, your DNA. Hu yirashecha. That DNA, that is going to be who inherits you. Pasuk Hey, vayotze oto hachutza. He takes him outside. Vayomer, and he says, Habetna hashamayma usapora hakochavim. Right? He takes him and looks at the stars, and he says, I want you to look at the sky. Can you count the stars? Im tuchal l'sporotam. Right? Similar to the dust. Right? Can you possibly count the stars? Vayomer lo, and Hashem continues, and he says to him, Ko yeh zarecha. This will be your children. Ve'emin b'Hashem v'yichsheveha lo tzedakah. Trust me, right? I am promising you a child of your DNA, and I'm promising you that that child will beget millions ultimately, right? Vayomer elav. Ani Hashem asher hotziticha me'or kasdim, right? I am the God that took you out of Or Kasdim, right? And I wanted you to hear that beginning, right? Because again, the Midrash highlights Or Kasdim is the Kivshan Ha'esh, right? This is the walking through the fire. I saved you from the fire. Latet lecha et ha'aretz hazot l'rishta, to give you this land. But all of a sudden, we're going to see how broken Avraham truly is, right? Even after this beautiful speech, the first time God is saying it's going to be your DNA. It's going to be from you. Avram says, Hashem, how do I know? Right? How do I believe you at this point? It's been years. How do I know? How do I know this is actually going to happen? Because this is not the first time you have promised me descendants. Right? So how do I know? And this is ultimately turns into Brit Ben Abitarim. God tells him about all of these karbanot he's going to have to bring, and very strange, cutting the animals, literally creating a path of these karbanot. And finally comes the official Brit Ben Abitarim, Pasuk et Gimel Vayomer LaAvraham. Hashem says to Avram, Yadoa tida ki ger yeh zarecha be'eretz lo lahem va'avadum v'inu otam arba me'ot shana. And Hashem comes to Avram and he says, you need to know your children will be strangers in a strange land, right? Somewhere outside of Israel, Be'eretz lo lahem, in a land that is not theirs, va'avadum, and they will be enslaved, v'inu otam, and they will suffer, arba me'ot shana, for 400 years. Pasuk Yudalid v'gam et hagoy asher ya'avodu, and that nation that enslaves them, Dan Anochi, I will judge them. And after that, they will leave incredibly wealthy. And what's incredible is this is not a happy promise, right? This is horrible, right? The Jewish people are going to suffer. The Jewish people are going to be enslaved. This is not something I would want to write home about, right? But this is a promise that actually gives Abraham comfort. Because it's not rainbows and butterflies. And it's not, oh, you're going to have kids like the stars in the sky. There's going to be so many. That seems too lofty. It doesn't seem believable after all of the challenges he has been through, right? So he's like, oh, that I believe, right? That story that my kids are going to have to suffer, but ultimately will come out okay. That brings me more believable oomph, right? That sounds biteable. Great. And all of a sudden, conversation over, and Avram is happy. He thanks God, and he walks away from the conversation. And with that, we now enter into Perek Tetzayin, where we're going to meet Hagar for the first time, and Sarai not for the first time, but we'll get to know her a little bit better. So, Perek Tet Zayin, Pasuk Aleph. Now, Pasuk Aleph to me is so loaded. We'll understand in a second why, but it's also, as I would call it, almost like the thesis statement that God is giving us for everything that's going to unfold over the dynamic of Avraham, Sarah, and Hagar. Right? So with that, let's see our thesis statement. V'Sarai, Eshet Avraham, lo yaldalo. Right? Sarai, the wife of Abraham, did not give birth to a child for him. Villa Shifra Mitzrit, and she had an Egyptian servant, Ushma Hagar, whose name was Hagar. Right, so now we have to understand, number one, why am I so wowed by Pasuk Aleph? Why do I think it's a thesis statement? And then understand who are all these characters, right? So the first part to look at is Sarai Eshet Avraham. Right, what a weird phrase. We know she's Eshet Avraham. We met her in Perek Aleph. We've seen her a few times since. We saw Avraham, tell her to say you're my sister when we go to Mitzrayim because I don't want people to take you. And, we see them come out together and we saw them move to Israel together. So this is not a new idea. Why is the text repeating that she's Eshet Avraham? If it just said Sarai, I'd know exactly who she is, right? And then Lo Yaldalo, obviously I know she hasn't had children. That's been the highlight of every single perek since we met them, that she's an akara, ein la valad, and every story, Avram's begging God for children. So that's also not a new piece of information. The only piece of information that's new is this woman Hagar, right? This servant Hagar, right? So what is the text trying to tell us in all of these pieces, right? So now let's go back and try to understand each part of the phrase, right? So the first is letting us know who's going to be the main part of the story, not Avraham, right? So far, it's been Avram wanting children, Avram going to God, but now we're seeing the new main, right? Sarai. And she wants you to know, as we enter into the story of what could have been surrogacy, but is now just literally polygamy, is Eshet Avraham, right? I want you to understand, readers, what's my role in this? I'm Avraham's wife. And that role is not changing. No matter what happens in this scenario, I am his wife. And not only am I his wife, I'm the one choosing to do this because I understand my status, right? And why do I think this is going to be the thesis of the entire story? Because she is purposely choosing, right? We're going to spend a lot of time on who she chooses and why. She is purposely choosing this surrogate who is a shifcha, right? Who is a servant, because she very much wants the roles clear as day. I am the wife. I run this house. I'm in charge. You are a shifcha. You are a servant. I don't care if you're pregnant with my husband's child. You are a servant and you will always be a servant because that's how dynamics worked, right? Back in the day. That was the understanding. You couldn't get out of service, right? Once you were an Eved, you were an Eved. You weren't rising up in the ranks. So she clearly wants you to understand, I'm the wife. I will always be the wife. And therefore, I'm in charge. Yes, it's true. Lo yaldalo. Everything that's about to happen is because I am taking the reins of the fact that I can't have children. But la shifchat mitzri ushma Hagar. But I have a servant whose name is Hagar. Now, most of us, when we hear Hagar's name or we think of Hagar, not positive thoughts, right? She's at best, right? The wife who had that troubled child who got kicked out and we never really hear about again, right? But I want us to understand who she is just from Pasuk Aleph. Yes, she is a shifcha, right? Rashi, interestingly, brings in a midrash here and says, why do I care she's from Mitzrayim? He acknowledges she was actually a princess in Mitzrayim. She was Bat Paro in Mitzrayim. And when Paro saw the miracles that happened to Avraham and Sarah when they came down to Mitzrayim and how God protected Sarah, he said, better for you to be a servant for that couple who was so connected to God then stay here as a princess. And she agrees and she goes. Now, again, similar to what I said last week and the week before, I think there's always more depth to Rashi than we give him. And so now I want to take a step out and appreciate the scene of Pasuk Aleph, right? I know I'm a little bit spoiler, but I think we're all somewhat versed with the story that Hagar does end up marrying Avraham and becoming pregnant with his child. So I want to go to that understanding of why Hagar, right? Because I actually think that's Rashi's question. Because Sarai and Avraham were incredibly wealthy, right? Until this Perek, we hear about it all the time, right? Even together, just the last page, we saw Avraham say to God, "You have blessed me with so much. I am so wealthy, but my servant's going to inherit me. What do I care?" Right? So meaning socioeconomically, they're doing very, very well. Meaning, if she has it in her mind right now that she wants a surrogate, she could hire anybody. She could pay anybody, right? Literally, a person, she would say, "Name your price because I'll pay it because this is what I want so badly," right? So I want us to appreciate that from a perspective of today's times, right? If someone wanted to have a child on their own or, needed someone else to have the child for them, right? I always envision, not to take away from the story, but this concept of no one would go into a sperm bank and just say, "Okay, I just need something," right? You'd want to read up on it. You'd want to know the DNA that's going into your future child, right? Color hair, how tall, family health history, what college, right? In terms of what was their SAT scores, whatever it may be, you'd want information, any information you could get in terms of choosing your DNA. Why would I think Sarah and Avraham wouldn't take the same time and effort in the same concept? Meaning, when Sarah is choosing Hagar, it's not like, "Oh, I have no servants, but oh, I have one. I have one. I'm going to use her. She'll be it because, she can't say no to me." I don't think that's how this was done. I think Sarai really thought about who she wanted to be the mother of her child. Because I think when the story begins, she mamash wants a surrogate. She wants that kid. She's not hoping, "Oh, no, Avram will have a kid and they'll have a wonderful life together." No, I think she very much wanted to be part of the story. And therefore, if she wanted to be part of the story, she wanted to care who this mother was going to be of the child. So when Rashi brings in that midrash, she had been a princess and she was leaving her life as princess to be with Avram and Sarah, I think it's trying to highlight she must have been really special. She must have, in some level, believed in their God to follow them. And I think that's exactly what Sarah is trying to tell us in this pasuk also. I'm choosing her because she's awesome. There is something about Hagar that is fabulous. And that's who I want to be the mother of this child because I think she's awesome. I want that DNA going to the child. But additionally, I think she'll include me. I think we'll have a good dynamic all together. I think she'll be able to separate, give me this kid, but obviously live in our home, and we can all somehow do this together. And I think that was Sarah's hope and goal in all of this. And therefore, I want us to try to reframe Hagar as we enter into the rest of this story and definitely into the chapter we're going to do next week of, I don't think she's so bad. I think she's great. So the question will really be what happens, right? What happens to her in the great? So let's watch it unfold together. Pasuk bet, Vatomer Sarai el Avram. And now Sarai comes to Avram and she says, "Listen, Hinei na atzarani Hashem miladet." Right? God has clearly stopped me from getting pregnant, from having a child. Bona al shifchati. I want you to go and be with my servant. Ulai ibanem mimena. Maybe I will be built through her. Vayishma Avram l'kol Sarai. And Avram listens to Sarah, right? And these three words are really the question of the Mefarshim. Ulai ibanem mimena. Maybe I will be built from her. What does she mean, right? Which is why many believe it's surrogacy. I'll be built from her because that kid is going to be mine, right? Yes, it's her egg and she'll carry it in her womb, but as soon as it's born, it's mine. So ulai ibanem mimena. I will be built from her. She's going to be the biology that I need, but I'm going to be that kid's mom. Right? Now, most Mepharshim believe that, and I totally hear why it is that in the Pshat, except that's not what happens. Right? When Yishmael is born, Sarah wants nothing to do with that child, right? Which is why there are a few Mepharshim that try to dissect it in another way. The Sforno, I think, is so psychologically in tune, and I think it's fabulous. According to the Sforno, and obviously I think modern science has backed him up, says, Ulai banemi mena. She says, maybe I'll be built through her, because she acknowledges, maybe once Avraham has his own kid with Hagar, I'll get pregnant myself, because the stress won't be on me anymore. Right? According to the Sforno, she's saying maybe this will have a domino effect on me, not because I think pregnancy is contagious, right? Not in that sense, but our bodies are machines, and her body has been under insane stress for years, trying so hard to have this kid, that maybe if the stress is relieved and I don't have this pressure that I have to provide a child for Avraham, maybe my body will start functioning normally again, and maybe I'll just actually have a child, right? And the Sforno is obviously ahead of his time, because there is medical research that says that this has happened to couples who do adopt and then get pregnant, because the stress was so much on the woman's body that once that stress was relieved and she just was so excited to be a mom, then she was able to get pregnant. So that's how the Sforno interprets it. Pasuk Gimel, Vatikach Sarai, Eshet Avraham, right? Again, highlighting the wife of Avraham takes at Hagar Hamitzrit Shivchata, her Egyptian servant, your servant, I'm the wife, Miketz Eser Shanim Lashevet Avraham Be'eretz Canaan, after they've been now in Israel for 10 years. Vatiteno Tala Avraham Isha Lalisha. And she gives Hagar as a wife to Avraham, right? So Miketz Eser Shanim, they waited 10 years in Israel, meaning Avraham is now 85. She is now 75, right? And it's just saying it so flippantly, almost like, oh, it's been 10 years. 10 years of 12 periods a year, sorry. 12 times 10, 120 times. Sarai was disappointed not to be pregnant. And she finally is saying, I'm taking the reins. I'm going another route in an incredibly beautiful way of saying, this is how I'm going to have a child. Pasuk Dalid, Vayavo el Hagar, Vatahar. Avraham is with Hagar, he sleeps with her, and she gets pregnant. Vatera ki harata, she sees that she is pregnant. Vatekel gvirta be'eneha. And all of a sudden, her master is light, is almost valueless in her eyes, meaning what just happened, right? Let's take this midrash. Let's take this understanding that Hagar was a princess from Egypt, follows Avram and Sarah because she thinks they are so connected to God. They are so wow factor. They are so amazing. I want to be connected to them. They are the best of the best, this Avram and Sarah couple, right? I just want to be them. And I imagine her heart broke for Sarah that she hasn't had a child, and she wants to do this for her. And then she's with Avraham, and so almost feeling instantaneously gets pregnant. And all of a sudden, Vatira ki harata, she sees she got pregnant. And all of a sudden she starts doing the math. She's like, you know what? Maybe I've been wrong. Maybe Sarah's not so awesome. Because if Sarah was so awesome, why wouldn't God let her get pregnant? Right? The question we ask so often, right? If I'm doing what you want, God, why are you not providing for me in the way I want, right? The concept that we believe God owes us one for whatever we do for him, right? And hopefully we can hear the humor in that statement, right? God doesn't owe us anything. We owe him everything, right? But she's looking at this and she's like, wow, Sarah must not be so spectacular, because she couldn't get pregnant all these years. I must be way better than her, because I just got pregnant like that. And now all of a sudden she's no longer my master, because I'm clearly more impressive than her. I'm clearly better than her. If God chose me to get pregnant instead of her, right? And what does that mean? Vatakel gvirta be'ina on a practical level, says the Mefarshim, say many of the Mefarshim. All of a sudden, when she was told to do jobs in the house that were her role, that were her responsibility, oh, I can't, right? Oh, I know it's my day to wash the floor, but you wouldn't know because you've never been pregnant, but like your back hurts. So I'm sorry, I can't. Oh, I'm supposed to make dinner tonight. Oh, you wouldn't know because you've never been pregnant, but you got really nauseous, so I cannot clean a chicken right now. Whatever it may be, she all of a sudden was throwing it back in Sarah's face, right? You can ask me to do these things, but I can't, right? Because of my situation, I can't, right? Which I can only imagine the pain that she was inflicting on Sarah in that way. Pasake, Vatomer Sarai al Avraham, right? Sarah is listening to this, and we see no reaction to Hagar. She immediately goes to her husband, right? She goes to Avram and she says, Hamasi Allaha, this is your fault. Anochi natati shifchati b'chedkecha, I gave you my maidservant. Vatira ki harata, as soon as she saw she got pregnant, now she doesn't treat me with respect. Now I'm nothing in her eyes. Yishpor Hashem beini u'beinecha, right? God should judge between you and I, Avraham. Right? So most people can look at this pasuk and say, totally get you. Gotta love my gender of women, but we often yell at our husbands even when it's not their fault, right? Because I don't see how this is Avram's fault, right? I blame you for the way she's treating me. She's treating you that way. What does he have to do with it, right? And she says, "Yishpor Hashem beini u'beinecha." God should judge between me and you, right? It's almost she's trying to say, why did God choose you to get to have the child and not me? So maybe that's what she's blaming him for, right? Chamasi Allaha, this is your fault, right? And Rashi brings in two very different, but both, I think, spot on ideas, right? Chamasi Allaha, what is she blaming him for, says Rashi, idea number one, right? You've been in the room, you've heard her talk to me like that, and you never defended me. You never opened up your mouth to say, don't talk to my wife like that. Don't you dare say that to my wife. Right? Where were you? Why couldn't you defend me? I was too embarrassed to even open my mouth, and you couldn't be there for me? You couldn't be the one that stood up for me? Right? So, Lafi Upshot, I think that makes tons of sense personally. But then he brings in a second idea. She says, I blame you for all of your tefillot. Right? She says, if we go back to page 2, when he fought with God and debated God, she says, what did you say to Hashem? Ma titain li. What are you going to give me? Right? And even when he pushes back again in Pasuk Chet, Bama Eida ki irashanu. Right? Everything is in singular I. And according to Rashi, she's saying, you pushed back on God, but you pushed back for you. And guess what? God answered you. He gave you a child for everything you said. All you had to say was us. What are we going to inherit? What is going to happen to us instead of me? She said, had you taken me into that tefillah with you, maybe I'd be the one pregnant, not Hagar, right? So when you hear these interpretations of Rashi, your heart breaks for Sarah all over again, right? Even though it broke in the pasuk before, your heart breaks just a little bit more and you hear her, right? As irrational as it sounded to start, all of a sudden you're like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah. You're right. Right? Which is why pasuk Vav, Vayomer Avram el Sarai Avram says to Sarah, Hinei shepchatech biadech, asila hatot beinayich. Right? Okay, so take your servant. You do whatever you think is right. She's not my wife. I don't think of her as my wife. The reason I didn't interject when she said those things is I don't see her as mine. I see her as your servant, your surrogate. So I'm okay with whatever you want to do, right? This was your idea. This was your everything. So do whatever you want and I'll back you up. I will support you and back you up with however you want to react and respond in this moment, right? You're 100% right. Atov beinecha. You do whatever you want, and I will support you. Vata'aneha Sarai. And Sarai makes her suffer, right? Ta'aneha means to oppress her in some way, right? To make her suffer in some way. Vativrach mipaneha. And then Hagar runs away, right? So here comes the Mefarshim and say, what did Sarah do? That sounds terrible, right? So some Mefarshim say, she didn't do anything so crazy. She literally just made her do her work, right? If we go back to that original interpretation that she was like, well, I can't cook dinner, I'm too nauseous, or I can't wash the floor because my back hurts. Sarah says, well, tough luck. It's your job, right? I don't care if you're nauseous, you're going to clean the chicken. And I don't care if your back hurts, you're going to wash my floors. And I don't care if it's a little bit dangerous to wash the windows, to stand on a chair, you're going to do it. Right? And according to Hagar, how did that make her feel? Batana. It felt like she was being oppressed, right? It felt like she was being made to suffer, right? In some way. Definitely, that was her perception, which is why that pasuk is written through that perspective. Bativrachmi panah. She runs away, right? This is her choice. This is all Hagar's light. The one pirush that is a little bit different and I think incredibly powerful and sad at the same time, the Ramban says, Vata'anaha Sarai. Chata'a imenu bi'inoizeh. The Ramban says, our mother sinned in this scene, right? Meaning he is not just saying she, I don't think he means she literally abused her, but he's saying she was in the wrong. She was totally in the wrong. And Ramban then says, and Avraham was in the wrong for letting it happen, for watching it and being okay. And the Ramban, who lived in the 1100s, long before, present history is being made, says, and what goes around comes around, Sarah. Because you oppressed Hagar and you made her suffer, Hagar's descendants will make your children suffer because this wasn't okay. Right. So I do want to appreciate the Ramban sensitivity there, but the one word I want to highlight that he says is chata imenu. Right. I think whenever we look at this, it's to remember, no matter how we're going to analyze it, she is one of the imahot. And therefore, no matter if we want to say she was right, if she was wrong, always through the lens of the perspective that she is imenu, she is one of the imahot. And obviously, we can only judge to whatever extent, appreciating that she was one of the four mothers, right? But whatever she did to Hagar got Hagar to a point that she runs away, right? Pasuk Zayin, Vayimtsa'a malach Hashem al ein hamayim bamidbar al ha'ayin b'derech shur. And the malach Hashem, an angel of God, finds her, right, while she's in this midbar, in this area that he bumps into her or finds her. Pasuk Chet Vayomer, and he says to her, Hagar shifchat Sarai, Amy zebatva anatelechi. Right, Hagar, the servant of Sarai, where are you coming from and where are you going? Right, literally trying to be like, seriously, what do you think you're doing? Right, who runs away in the scene? What are you doing? But what's amazing is her response. Vatomer, and she says, Mipnei Sarai gvirti anochi borachat. I'm running away from my master Sarai. Right, so there's so much to understand in this pasuk. But first, I want to take it from a broad perspective before we go to the details. Right, again, I want to envision the scene in Ki'ilu modern times. Right, someone is running away. Right, you're running away from whatever your life situation, and you're, let's say, at a bus stop. Right, Hagar is at a way, and all of a sudden, someone comes over to you, right, and says, Sefa Kirschblum from Dagan Efrat, what are you doing? Right? Where are you coming from and where are you going? I think the first thing out of my mouth would be, who the heck are you and how do you know me? Right? How do you know my name? How do you know where I'm from? For her, how do you know my job? Who are you? Right? What freak are you that you know these things? I'd probably scream and run for my life. Right? But she's so calm, cool, and collected. And her response is honest. I'm running away from my master, Sarah. I'm just like, wait, what? What just happened? Right? What is this scene? Which, when I slowly answer that, all of a sudden, everything we said from Pasuk Aleph is going to make so much more sense, right? Why is she calm when this man or this thing knows her by name, knows her job, and knows she's running away? Because she knows he's an angel. She is fully aware that he is a Malach Hashem, because the rest of the story, he continues giving her a prophecy, giving her a nivuah, and never does she bat an eyelash, right? She clearly is in on it and knows he is a malach. And to know that he's a malach, number one, and not be freaked out by that means this isn't her first encounter. She's seen malachim, right? Probably whether they were talking to Avram or in Sarah or not, but she's witnessed it, meaning what a level this woman must be on, that not only does God talk to her, but she's totally comfortable with God talking to her. She's totally okay and used to it because she's that special, right? So with that, I want us to now go back to the pasuk and see what he says to her, right? He says, Hagar Shifchat Sarai, right? First and foremost, what's your identity? You're a Shifcha, right? You are a servant. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? What do you think you're doing? And what's her answer? Oh, I know that she's my master. I know that I'm her servant. I don't even have a destination, right? Anochi borachat. I'm just running. She doesn't say where she's going because she doesn't know where she's going, right? She literally has zero destination. She's aimless because she totally understands that what she's doing is ridiculous, right? She totally understands the problem. She understands the problem. I think I'm no longer a servant, but I am, right? I get Sarah is my master, but I just don't want to be there anymore. Do I have a better plan? I don't have a better plan. I'm literally Anochi Borachat. I'm literally just running away. I haven't really thought this out, right? I haven't really come up with a plan, right? Which is why everything that the Malach is about to tell her, she's going to accept so much more, because she didn't have a vision of somewhere else she was going, and now he's trying to change her vision. She's acknowledging, oh, I don't have vision. I don't know what I thought I was doing, but I don't know. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to run, right? So we're actually going to pause here for tonight, but with this understanding that number one, she must be wonderful to number one, be chosen to be the surrogate mother. Number two, for Malach Hashem to come talk to her. He's going to give her a prophecy. He's going to make her promises, right? And in addition, for that not to be shocking, for this clearly not to be the first time an angel is talking to her. And next week, please God, we'll get to see the promise of the Malach, but most significantly, we'll see Perek Chaf Aleph that we will read on Rosh Hashanah of the story of her and her son Ishmael getting kicked out and how that unfolds. So looking forward to next Sunday. Have a wonderful week. And it was a pleasure learning with you.
Thank you so much. You know that else, it reminds me of Yonah running away from Hashem a little bit. I just as you were talking.
Yes, exactly.
I looked at that, but
end goal. Right. No end goal, just I need to get away. I need to get away.
Yeah.
And both stories have that same common bond in the end. They can't. Right? There's no such thing as being able to run away. So 100%, Naomi. It's a definite correlation.
Also, I think with respect to Sarah, like I don't think we can look at her as like an ordinary person, like the way I would see her sin. I think it's something like very much more subtle and, you know.
100%. That's why I like to highlight that word of the Ramban of Imenu. She is one of the Imahot, and it could literally just have been telling her to do her job. But from Hagar's perspective, that was just too much, right? That was, you can't expect me to do X, Y, or Z. And I agree. Like, of course you can.
And maybe because of what Sarah really represented, Hagar knew what Sarah stood for. And so even if she gave her a little bit of rebuke, it was really very difficult on her, just knowing perhaps
100%.
I'm guessing.
Right. Again, highlighting that shifra. What shifra should be able to open her mouth to her master? That should never be. So 100%. But we'll see even more of it unfold. And I think a lot of your points will be even more highlighted as we see Perek Chaf Aleph, like of that next week's dynamic.
Sorry, just to be sure I understood, you think that Hagar should be Imaot?
No, I don't think she's one of the imahot,
Ah,
but I think at least until this point, she was a really quality person that was someone special that could have been more, that we'll see how it, it ultimately fails. But I think
Okay.
her potential was huge, I
Yeah.
guess. So hopefully next week you'll even appreciate the answer more.
Thank you very, very much. Beautiful.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.